us from New Jersey, where he lives with his wife and children. And shall I don't know, you can tell me, shall I introduce everybody now and just let them go on, or shall I stop here? Anybody have an opinion? Leva?
Let's continue and introduce as they come.
Okay, all right, thank you, Abu.
Wait, can I just mention something? I'm going to put everybody on mute. So if you're speaking, you're going to have to remove yourself from mute.
Okay. So first, we're welcoming. Thank you very much, Imam Saffet.
Wonderful to be with you all today. Assalamu alaikum, peace, shalom alaikum, blessings, shanti, blessings be with all of you. Coming to you from my home in New Jersey, and as we're all coming to each other from our homes, and look forward to the day, and we pray God that this pandemic be lifted, and that all those who are sick and afflicted by this disease or other disease be fully cured and return to good health and full health, and that He protect our families and our children and our grandchildren and our communities from this pandemic, and that He gives us strength during these times of difficulties, and that He bless us to gather together again in person with one another, even as we gather virtually in order to keep each other safe and to protect one another. So thank you again, Deborah, and thank you to CJMU for organizing this wonderful program. It's a blessing and an honor to be with you all. I had a PowerPoint that I wanted to share. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that or not. So if you can advise me on that, that would be great.
I've made you co-host. I've made you co-host, and you should be able to share.
Okay, so let's see if we can do that, and that will hopefully allow me to stay focused for the 10 to 15 minutes that I look forward to sharing with you. And I'm eagerly looking forward to listening to all of my sisters and brothers on this panel, and for the wonderful presentations and to learn from them. Okay, let's see if we can do this. Share screen. And slideshow from beginning. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes? Okay,
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, actually it's fortuitous and maybe a sign of the great work that CJMU has been doing for many years that God is smiling on all of you. Because just this past week, He gave to you in New York City at Columbia University, the Secretary General of the United Nations' amazing speech. It's considered to be a landmark speech on the issue of climate change. General Secretary Antonio Guterres at Columbia University.
Are you off to nap? Okay.
Hello? Yeah. Spoke to us last week from Columbia University virtually, and he talked about the state of our planet. For our planet is broken. He gave a lot on issues of facts about our warming planet, and he provided us with some practical responses that we all need to consider as individuals, as members of faith communities, as members of NGOs, as members of greater society and of humanity at large, and as citizens of nations of this world. So making peace with nature is the defining task of this 21st century. And then I'm not going to go through the details, but I do strongly advise, if you haven't had the chance already, to please view his speech. They have the recording of it as well as the text of the speech online. And he declares the state of the planet is broken. And I'm going to touch on these areas, or try to touch on many of these areas in my presentation. Humanity is waging a war on nature. Nature always strikes back, and it is already doing so with growing force and fury. And of course, here we're speaking about extreme weather events. The frequency and intensity has no precedent in human history. In terms of the fires, I was just on a phone call the other day with a friend of mine from California and SoCal, and how that the electricity was turned off and that they actually had to evacuate their homes. And they live in the zip codes where you're not supposed to have to do that, right? They pay enough real estate taxes for that not to happen. But this is affecting all people in all zip codes. The fallout of the assault on our planet is impeding efforts to eliminate poverty and imperiling food security. Something which faith communities are very much about is taking care of the most vulnerable, of honoring the guest and the stranger, and That's something that falls into our area of social good and operations that we do within the world to uplift the situation of our congregants, our community, and the strangers amongst us. And it is our, and he finally says, it is making our work for peace even more difficult as the disruptions drive instability, displacement, and conflict. We ain't seen nothing yet, to put it in the vernacular of Jersey. And God protect us from what we're about to see if we don't make a change and reverse course on this defining moment of human history, this climate emergency. I would like just to mention that it's not accidental, and once again, I think fortuitous, that the term peace is critical, but the term peace is how we greeted one another today. Greetings of peace. It is a strong central component of our faith traditions, especially we have salam, shalom, right, between the Muslim and the Jewish faith communities. What does Islamic faith teach about the environment in 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes? Not easily to capture. Faith traditions have a well of resources and information and teachings with regard to an environment. They were not required to be discussed as such, in my understanding and my humble study, in the past, because human beings were not the ones who were ultimately in charge of the world in the terms of the environmental world. The physical systems used to function. We would alter them a little bit, but the basic physical systems could not be undermined by human intervention. After the industrialization, the world has changed significantly and unprecedentedly. And that's why scientists and social scientists are calling this new era, this new epoch, the Anthropocene era. It is the age of man, because man's ability to destroy the very world in which we live, not just with the nuclear capabilities, but with our poisoning of the atmosphere, with the greenhouse gas emissions, is unprecedented in human history. And we are seeing, as Antonio Gratero mentioned, nature striking back. In the Quranic conception, or the Islamic conception, we begin with the idea that revelation is multifaceted. Revelation is the books of scripture. We consider ourselves to be amongst the peoples of the books. Ahlul Kitab, specifically, these are the 3 monotheistic traditions, the Abrahamic faith traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the Quranic teachings also speak about a second book, and that's the book of the natural world, as being a source of revelation for human beings. And in fact, the word ayah, which means verse in the Holy Quran, in the physical book, which we have as capturing the revelation given to the Prophet Muhammad over 1,400 years ago, 114 chapters, 6,236 verses, Muslims believe to be God's word, as recorded in the Arabic language, or the language of revelation. That is only matched by the word of God in nature and natural phenomena itself. 38 out of the 114 chapters, according to my counting, are named after nature or natural phenomena or creatures of nature. So we have Al-Ankabut, which means the spider, Al-Baqarah, the cow, the chapter on the cow, the largest chapter in the Holy Quran, the longest chapter, the 2nd chapter. We have Al-Ra'd, thunder, and so on and so forth. The list goes on. 38 out of the 114 chapters of the Holy Quran are named after creatures in the natural world or natural processes and natural phenomena. The scholars of the Quranic hermeneutics and Quranic exegesis, we call tafsir in the Arabic language, tell us that there are over 700 verses of the Holy Quran that explicitly speak to nature and natural phenomena. And that when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, according to Muslim tradition, received the first revelation, initiating him into prophethood by the Archangel Gabriel, salam, it was a revelation that he received while being in a cave of Hira in the Mountain of Light outside of Mecca, which was his hometown. And the revelation began not, "Oh, Muhammad, believe in me or one God and worship me alone," which is sort of the declaration of Muslim faith or the bear witnessing of the faith in Islam. But rather, he received the command, "Iqra," which means read. And the Prophet Muhammad was unlettered. He was what we call in the Arabic Nabi al-Ummi. He was an unlettered prophet, unable to read and write, like much of his contemporaries at that time in the Arabian Peninsula. And there's a long story, it goes back and forth, and most Muslim children learn this when they're growing up as part of their Sunday school education. And he says, Ikra, read. He said, read in the name of your Lord. Oh, I have to do the admission since I'm the co-host. Okay. Read in the name of your Lord who created you. And so the idea is that while the prophet was unlettered and unable to read the scripture, written scripture, he was able to read the signs in nature and come to the conclusion that nature itself is the sign, and signs point to that which is greater than themselves, pointing to one God, and the processes of harmony and balance that God has put within the natural world that indicate there must be someone who has put all of this together in such a wonderful way, and we should then worship and serve that greater being by service to humanity and service to creation at large. The Prophet Muhammad also said, and he always emphasized the point that he was connected to the prophets who came before him. He called them his brother prophets. He said we have different fathers, but we share one faith and one religion. And George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright, said, and I always love to quote this, he says, there's only one religion, but there's 1,000 versions of it. So something to speak about that issue. But he said one of the revelations which he received, which was distinct or sort of set him apart from his previous brethren prophets, he says, the entirety of the earth has been made a place of prayer for me. Very specifically, what this means in Muslim acts of worship, that wherever we are, when the time of prayer comes in, we do not need to find the local mosque in order to pray in. We can conduct the prayer services in God's mosque, which is the greater mosque, the natural world. We need only to orient ourselves towards Mecca, make sure we're in a state of spiritual and physical purity through ablution, and begin our prayer. And so the entire prayer, all the sacraments, maybe we'd use the term sacraments in other faiths, are actually able to be practiced by a Muslim, male or female, in the absence of a physical mosque. The only one exception is being the Hajj, the fifth pillar of al-Islam. And what this means in the bigger picture, it implies, is that the fellow creatures which we share this earth with are not just fellow creatures according to Islam's teaching, they are fellow worshipers of God. And indeed, there's verses in the Holy Quran which speaks to the fact that each creature has its own distinctive mode of prayer and praising and glorifying the Lord. Alayhi salatu wa tasbihah, for those of you who know the Arabic language. Each one. And they are organized into distinct ummams, which means socially organized communities with families, with leadership, with structures in which they're able to conduct the affairs of the community similar to ours, similar to our nations. And therefore, the Quran cautions in another verse, Al-khalqu samawati wal-ard akbar min khalq an-nas. The creation of the heavens and earth is bigger than you, O human beings. You're not as important as you think you are. And we're seeing that. When we mess with nature, don't mess with Mother Nature, as they say, nature strikes back in a big way. Zip codes don't matter in California, and they're not going to matter in New Jersey and New York, as we know, when the hurricanes hit, when the storms hit, which are a reaction to human negative intervention in the environment and natural world. There's certain Islamic terms, and I know I'm going past my time. Let me see timing here. Okay, give me a couple more minutes. Certain Islamic concepts. One, that the earth was given to us as a built environment, as my engineering friends like to say, and was given to us as a trust. And those of you who are in the legal area, I do some work in commercial real estate. So the idea of trust are very important in the sense that you don't own or have the freedom to do what you want when you're entrusted with a trust. You have to follow the guidance and the guidelines of the one who originated the trust as a trustee, and faithfully follow them. And so the trust of maintaining this built environment, which was given to us in balance and in harmony, as the verse at the end points out, is placed within human beings. We were actually we were not God's first choice for this. In the verse, which is at the beginning of this, we see that the earth herself the mountains and the sky were offered this trust, and they thought about it, which means they have intelligences. And they said, you know what? That's a heavy duty responsibility to take care of the entire earth for ourselves and future generations. And they chose not to do so. But human beings infused with the divine spirit, what some of our faith brothers and sisters from other faiths call the children of God, have undertaken that responsibility because of that divine touch and the commensurate ability to really do the right thing, but also, unfortunately, to do the wrong thing. And the verse finishes, either the human beings are being unjust, they'll end up being unjust, or they're just plain ignorant. They don't realize the massive responsibility of taking on this planet. But as it says in another verse in the Quran, God does not place upon any individual or any people more than they have the ability to bear. We assume this responsibility in our function as khulafa. Khulafa is not just a concept within the Muslim tradition, in other words, speaking specifically to Muslims, but speaks to all human beings. We are the vice regents, we are the caretakers and the guardians, the stewards of the earth, and our challenge is to be good stewards, not bad stewards. Some of us have been given more than others, so our responsibility in that case is even more. For to whom more has been given, more will be expected. And we have to reset the balance. That's the challenge. Quran is very specific about, and Islam's teachings about who's responsible. The buck stops here. If we're human beings, the buck stops here. It stops with us. Corruption, fasad, has appeared in the earth, and this is translated by modern scholars of interpretation of the Quran as pollution, which is also a word, which is also one of the meanings found in the word fasad in the original Arabic, because of what human beings' hands have wrought. We've done it. We're responsible. It is anthropogenic. It is human caused, and therefore the solution lies within ourselves. Lastly, I like to point out, and there are other verses in the Quran that deal with this, but I'll just conclude here in that it's very interesting that in the Quranic teachings, Shaitan, or Satan, is very much viewed as an enemy of human beings, as a foe. And he has his co-workers or his fellow Satans that help him out in his business of deviating human beings. And basically what the Quran says is that in this process, you as human beings can become a brother or a sister of Satan. And how do you do so? It's not that you adopt a different religious practice or different faith. You become the brethren of Satan by wasting the God-given resources that you have in your hands, depriving them of others within the earth herself, depriving them from future generations. And you become guilty of then being the brethren, the brothers and sisters of Satan. So let us not be the brothers and sisters of Satan. And let us adopt the path, as the Quran says, of walking upon the earth softly and gently. The second part of the statement, and just to wrap up, is practical and faith-based responses. One area that we have focused on, and Muslim environmental activists have focused on, is trying to revive the traditions as they speak, for example, to the issue of Ramadan. Ramadan is a month-long faith practice in which Muslims try to become closer to God through various acts of piety and worship. This past year, we did not do the communal gatherings in the mosques as we traditionally did because of the COVID restrictions. But normally Muslims gather together, share the fast-breaking meal, the iftar, as you know, and I'm sure you've shared that up with each other as different faith communities. And during that time is the opportunity to highlight and to bring to the fore prophetic practices with regard to eco-consciousness and sustainability. And so there's a focus on reduction of energy, reduction of water consumption, especially during the making of the ablution, elimination of plastic bottles, et cetera, to begin to develop more eco-conscious practices in keeping with the lifestyle and life example of the Prophet Muhammad. And if this is done over the course of a month, the idea is that these will become habits of the heart, that they will continue throughout the rest of the year. different types of, and I'll share this PowerPoint with the organizers. You can look at it on your own time. Have been broken down to allow Muslim households this year and previous year, Muslim communities, Muslim mosques to adopt a green mosque or a green Ramadan program. And this sort of gives them a rubric and a matrix by which they can situate themselves. And at the end of the time, there is a recognition, because we need to celebrate the accomplishments of our communities, that you've completed the Green Ramadan campaign successfully, and we've planted trees in the name of people, in the name of communities, and this year in the name of people connected to those communities, because as I mentioned, the mosque was at home this year for the month of Ramadan in different parts of the world through the Arbor Day Foundation. What we realized, though, is that working with the National Organization of ISNA, Ramadan can't stop with Ramadan. We got to continue those eco practices throughout the year. But more importantly, we got to work on ways in which we can make our buildings more eco-friendly. Up to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions are the result of what happens within buildings and the constructions themselves. So if we're able to make our buildings more eco-friendly, we're able to make that significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So working together with the EPA, first time in history, the Islamic Society of North America's Green Initiatives Committee was able to develop this action book for Muslim communities. There is a generic faith action book for faith communities, but nothing specific to the Muslim faith community. And working together with them, we were able to develop this. And the hope is that as time progresses, 2,700 mosques in the United States, the over 300 Islamic schools will adopt these practices that will permanently cause them to get the ENERGY Star rating and to become eco-friendly buildings, places of worship that are in keeping with the greater mosque that we're all a part of, which is the earth herself. I can talk later about international things if there's time, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop because there was international movements with regard to the fossil fuel divestment movement, et cetera. But I will not go into that now because I understand that I've run out of time. So thank you for allowing me to share, and looking forward to hearing my fellow panelists and to being with you a little bit longer. God bless.
Thank you. Oh, very inspiring. And I didn't mention at the beginning, I hope we have some time for questions. If it doesn't seem like we will, people can write questions in the chat and we will try to get everybody back to whoever they have the question to. Our next presenter is Moshe Kornfeld, who has been involved in the environmental movement since his early adulthood, working with youth and school-age children at Teva, a Jewish environmental education program. He received his doctorate in anthropology from the University of Michigan and has been working and teaching in a variety of postdocs. He's taught courses in faith and environment and is the founder of a Jewish climate organization in Denver, Colorado, where he lives, teaches, and is a part-time chazan at Rodef Shalom Synagogue. He lives there with his wife, Rachel, and our 2 grandchildren. So I'm welcoming Moshe.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me. Today is actually my son's first birthday, Noah, who we named after the story in the Bible, in part, in the hope that we can enact climate change. Right? Noah is a name of hope, of comfort, and so we hope that he brings comfort, and that is what we hope for. So I, as my mom shared, I came to this first. I started working for an organization called the Teva Learning Center, a Jewish environmental education organization, and in that work we taught school-age children, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, about the connections between Judaism and the environment. We taught them that this connection was inherent to Judaism. We taught them about the ancient agricultural laws, about how about sabbatical and the jubilee and the redistributive sort of practices that were part of those obligations to sort of redistribute part of the agricultural yields of each year and to let the land lie fallow. We taught about the idea of bal tashchit, of not, first was in the Bible talks about not cutting down fruit trees during a time of war, during a siege of a city, and that was interpreted by later commentaries, later rabbis to mean that we cannot waste even a mustard seed. And we highlighted environmental eco-themed midrashim, for example, the one that was on the flyer that was made for this program, right? See to it that you do not spoil and destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one else to repair it. We highlighted these ideas, these environmental ideas, and presented them as self-evident, as an integral part of Jewish tradition. After I left the Teva Learning Center, I became an anthropologist, and I started to try to understand sort of the roots of these ideas, thinking about it not only, taking a step back as being both a participant and an observer, as anthropologists are like to do. So I ended up teaching a class called Religion, Environmentalism, and Politics, in which we think about how faith traditions, right, especially Abrahamic religions and also indigenous religions and indigenous practices, imagine the connection between religion, between nature and people and the environment, and also thinking about how religions reimagine themselves and rethink their practices and their customs in light of ecological disaster. So what I'm going to share today is a little bit of that work of trying to understand how it is that religions rethink themselves and reimagine themselves in response to environmental disaster. And I start with an essay written by an historian whose name is Lynn White. He published an essay called "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis." And it was a very influential and sort of famous essay that still is read and considered. Just a few pages, but has generated a whole sort of host of responses. And he writes, he notes that humankind is sort of a creature that has spoiled its nest. More than any other creature, and especially in light of our technological capabilities, we've gained the ability to essentially destroy the world that sustains us. Right? He claims that the ideas behind the Industrial Revolution, and namely that nature is an object to be manipulated for human betterment, has its roots in Judeo-Christianity. And in particular, he notes that the Bible, right, and enjoins humankind to dominate nature, right? God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth." There's a basic, deep idea in Judaism and in Christianity that sort of nature is secondary, right, and is essentially there for for us to master and control. And he claims, right, he makes this very sort of hard to stomach claim that Christianity, and I posit also Judaism, bears a burden of guilt for ecological degradation. That this idea that's at the heart of Christianity is, when combined with technological abilities, never imagined, that emerged with the Industrial Revolution, that these deep cultural ideas regarding the relationship of humankind and nature leads us inexorably, I can't even pronounce that word, towards ecological crisis. So unless we change this culture, this idea, unless we find new we replace this idea of the relationship between nature and people, we won't be able to shift course. He writes, "No new set of basic values has been accepted in our society to displace those of Christianity. Hence, we shall continue to have a worsening ecologic crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve man. According to this thesis, the essential anthropocentrism of Judeo-Christianity, especially its Western variants, is a root cause of our ecological degradation. So that was written in 1967. More than 50 years later, I find this idea to be very compelling. Addressing ecological disaster requires not only technological solutions, but cultural solutions that reimagine and realign the relationship between humans and nature. So the question that remains is, to what extent can the wisdom of faith traditions, especially those that are deeply anthropocentric, such as Judaism, be applied to this project of reimagining the relationship between humans and nature? White's answer to this question was to draw on the 13th century figure Saint Francis of Assisi, who he asserts can serve as the patron saint of ecology. Saint Francis tried to flatten the hierarchy between people and the natural world. He tried to, and I'm quoting from the essay, depose man from his monarchy over creation and set up a democracy of all God's creatures. He often referred to brother ant and sister fire, praising the creator in their own ways, just as humans do. It actually is no coincidence that our current Pope, a champion of faith responses to the climate disaster, took on the name Pope Francis when he became Pope. So turning back to Judaism, this leads me to a few observations. First is that there are some central streams in Judaism that are actually anti-environmental, in contrast to those messages we shared, those critical messages we shared with the school-age children about the inherent connection between Judaism and nature. There are strong streams of anti-environmentalism within Judaism. The second point is that drawing on Judaism in order to address ecological problems and climate change in particular requires us to reimagine and reconceptualize Judaism for an ecological age. It's a project. It's something we have to do actively. And I want to suggest two possible modes for doing this work that I hope I'm going to think about them in a Jewish context, but I think these two modes are also important for society more generally. In the first mode, normative contextualized readings of Jewish texts and Jewish practices exist are limits for the boundaries and create the boundaries of possible Jewish responses to environmental disaster. In a second approach, Jewish ideas, texts, theologies, and practices are starting points for melding Judaism and some of the more radical and least anthropocentric, least human-centered conceptions of the relationship between nature and people. The first approach I will sort of share in relation to a scholar whose name is Chava Tirosh Samuelson. She edited a volume called Judaism and Ecology, Created World and Revealed Word, and it's part of the Religions of the World and Ecology series. If you are not familiar with the series, I highly recommend that you go check it out. It has a volume for each of the major world religions. So she identifies several voices within the diverse Jewish tradition. And one voice, right, the one that we were drawing on at the Teva Learning Center, and all the other efforts, all the Jewish environmental nonprofits that have blossomed, the Teva Learning Center, Chazon, which means vision and does sort of environmental work within the Jewish community, Dayenu, a recent sort of youth climate organization that has emerged to lobby, our politicians from a Jewish perspective to enact climate change action. And even recently, you should check out, there's an eco Bible that was just published, which I'm very excited about. It was edited by Jonathan Nerrell. So all this work is part of this first voice, which is rooted in the view that the human is but a steward of God's earth. And this view is totally compatible with environmentalism, with conservationism. However, she notes there's another voice within Judaism that highlights the opposition between the human and the natural. Only humans can receive and respond to divine obligations to be holy, like God is holy. And only humans can transform the natural world through religious acts that sanctify the natural. Nature itself is not sacred, but is sanctified through human actions. From the second perspective, attempts to identify nature with God exist as a form of idolatry that Judaism attempts to eradicate. And lastly, there is a voice in Judaism that denies the natural world. The natural world is but a mirror of the real world, the divine world, the non-corporeal reality. In this sense, nature, the natural world, is negative when compared to is negative when compared to the real, important divine world. And so she notes that, as environmentalists, as Jews sort of become familiar with environmentalism, and environmentalism become more familiar with Judaism, she writes, it may become clear not only how Judaism is compatible with conservationism, with environmentalism, but also where Judaism conflicts with the radical activism of Earth First, or with the metaphysical claims of deep ecology. She argues that a Jewish approach essentially is anthropocentric, right? Even the most sort of ambitious sort of authors in her volume, right? It's a collection of essays, scholars such as Art Green, who assert that nature is holy, ultimately and unambiguously privilege the human in the order of things. And many environmentalists, especially those associated with deep ecology, that flatten and try to undermine the hierarchy that places humans at the top. So even the most sort of, ambitious and Jewish environmentalists that ascribe sanctity to nature don't go as far as deep ecologists. So that's one mode, which is to work within the system, to try to figure out how far can we go with an honest and contextualized and normative reading of Jewish texts. I conclude with a second approach, and this approach is more radical, and it's advocated by, sort of paradigmatically, by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who is the founder of Jewish Renewal, an American Jewish movement that I find to be very fascinating. And Schachter, he developed and popularized such ideas such as eco-kashrut. And in eco-kashrut, you're not as concerned with the technicalities of the kosher laws, but you're taking the idea of being sensitive and eating in a religious way to be concerned with eating sustainably, and also about the social costs of the way you eat. So ideas such as this reimagine Judaism in light of environmental concerns. So Schachter, unbound by the limits of normative Jewish theology and practice, he creatively melds Judaism and environmentalism, embracing ideas drawn from deep ecology and attempting to flatten the hierarchy that puts humankind at top, at the apex of creation. For Shachter Shalomi, Judaism is not a limiting factor, but an evolving living organism that adapts to new problems with new ideas. Addressing Tu B'Shvat, a holiday that the translation is the 15th of the month of Shvat, a holiday that originally dealt with the tithing of trees, but that has taken layers of meaning over time. Shachter Shalomi writes that the Mishnaic sages, the sages of the 1st, 2nd century, the Kabbalists of the 15th, 16th century, the Zionists, and today Jewish environmentalists who have all reimagined the holiday of Tu B'Shvat. These and more have taken their turn at the growing edge of the Jewish tree. Maybe because ancient Jewish antipathy towards pagan tree worship, the mostly secular Zionists were the first to celebrate the whole tree and all trees, rather than just the edible fruit of the fruit-bearing trees. However, he notes, in our day, when we clearly need trees to absorb carbon dioxide and to give us the essential fruit of oxygen, we should regard every tree as a fruit tree. He describes Tu B'Shvat as a Gaian holiday, right? And this for a rabbi is pretty radical because, right, the Gaia hypothesis is the idea that Earth is a one singular living, breathing organism and is sometimes taken to be, right, Gaia was an ancient Greek goddess, and this idea is sometimes taken to mean that the earth itself is sacred. Sacredness exists within those interconnected systems that provide us with life. So this is a radical idea for a rabbi, really pushing well beyond the limits of normative Judaism. Coming back to, right, the idea of climate change. I believe that addressing climate change and ecological disaster requires cultural change. A reimagining of the relationship between people and nature. I'm not sure that I would go as far as Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, but I do think that we must embrace the interconnectivity and interdependence of all beings. That idea that we are essentially interconnected to each other and interdependent on nature must be at the forefront of our cultures. And while it is no way assured, I hope and will continue to promote a Judaism to draw on the wisdom of Judaism that helps us to achieve these goals, to reimagine our societies in ways that allow us to move back beyond the idea that nature is just an object that we can manipulate and that doesn't have value in its own right. And I think these ideas for how to reimagine Judaism can relate to broader societal questions for how to address environmentalism. We have a way too large group of people who think that environmentalism is not a problem. They are essentially anti-environmentalists. There are those who want to work within the system, who want to sort of draw on our existing culture to address environmental degradation. And there are those who want to reimagine what our society is, how we relate to each other, and radically transform our society in order to address environmental problems and the pressing, existential crisis of climate change. While I don't have a specific, I hope, options 2 and 3 together can somehow work. In some, we have to engage on all levels, all faith traditions, all peoples have to add their voice to the chorus of people to reimagine our different traditions, our different practices, so that we can solve this problem, which for the sake of my son Noah, and so that he doesn't have to survive the flood, we can avoid the flood. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Moshe. Yeah. God willing, God willing. Our next speaker is Dr. Jackie Ebner. She's a professor of sustainability and the founder of RECA, the Rochester Area Interfaith Climate Action Group. She works as a consultant and a teacher, both at Bard College and at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, where she received her PhD. Her particular interests range from reducing food waste, promoting renewable energy, and developing sustainable business models. She is a member of Temple Sinai and believes faith communities are a great place to enrich your life and make a difference. We work at RECA on very practical solutions, like Iman Saffet mentioned, greening how our buildings work and things like that. So now I'm welcoming Jackie. Thank you very much.
And if I can, I'd also like to share my screen. So first, I'd like to just say how nice it is to see so many friends and familiar faces. And also how wonderful the work that you're doing in bringing the Muslim and Jewish community together. Every time I'm involved in an event like this, it always really brings home how much more we have in common with each other, how very common our roots are and many of our teachings as brothers and sisters of Abraham. So wonderful information from both of the speakers before me. So as Debbie said, mine is kind of the highlight reel. It focuses on actions, and I'll be highlighting some of the actions that different congregations can take and that you can take, and really focusing on action and how you can make a difference. I do like to generally start with who you are. I know Debbie took you through that already for me, but I think the point I want to make here is that when you're thinking about action, it's important to think about who you are in terms of what skills you have and what you can bring, and what interests you have, and what drives your passion, and what sphere of influence you can have and where you can make a difference. So that's kind of the context of this. I began my career as an engineer, so I like to think about solutions. I like to think about actions and designing things, not necessarily developing new technologies, but applying technologies. Debbie mentioned that my work has to do with waste to energy, different types of renewable energy, circular business models, and food waste. So those are kind of interests that I like to work in. She mentioned that I teach and consult, but really my motivation is shown here on the right. That's my family on a trip to Utah, where we were canyoneering, which is hiking through the slot canyons of Utah. So you can see my 3 children and my husband there. And they really are my motivation to try and make change and to learn more about sustainability and solutions. And then my sphere of influence, among other things, is my community. So I'm also a graduate of Teva, which is a wonderful organization. And I work a lot with Hazon and some of the other Jewish organizations. But my community, and in returning back to Rochester in 2007, we became members of Temple Sinai, which was shown on that first slide, our beautiful temple located, really integrated in with nature. And I think I saw Rabbi Katz was on the call, and Laura and some other people from Temple Sinai, so welcome. Happy to see you here. So thinking about how I can make a difference, I want to think about my community and my congregation and the friends and the impact that I have through my congregation. So that's really the motivation and the rationale behind RECA. It stands for Rochester Area Interfaith Climate Action. And we're a group of individuals and organizations of faith in the Rochester, New York metropolitan area, but more and more we're able to be virtual. So it's so nice to have this national representation of people from all over the country. And what we're seeking to do is really take meaningful action to create a meaningful response to climate change. Again, very action oriented. And in doing so, we acknowledge our common conviction. Really, we talked about two faiths here, but virtually every faith has a common conviction to care for the earth and for its people. And in doing this work, we want to share resources, leverage our strengths, and magnify our positive impact. So we want to work together with each other. Just a little bit, this is a little Rochester centric perhaps, but a little bit of rationale on faith communities, and you can certainly extrapolate this to the country. According to the 2010 census, there are about 500,000 religious adherents, or nearly 44% of the population in Rochester that is affiliated with a religious congregation, and about 983 religious congregations. So these are houses of worship. Each of those has a footprint. Each of those provides heating and cooling. Each of those serves, many of them serve food. Many of them have congregants or people that are staff that are going and coming to the facilities. So all of those have an impact, and then all of those have a reach beyond the facility itself to the households that are members of the congregation. As I said, and you've heard today, stewardship for the earth and its people aligns with virtually every faith tradition. In addition to the footprint of the facilities and of the congregants, we are educating and providing moral leadership to our communities. And working together is a great way. I think Moshe kind of alluded to this in terms of the Jewish movement. There's something called the Jaffe movement, the Jewish outdoor food, environmental education or something like that. So basically there's a movement of primarily young people that are becoming re-engaged with Judaism through understanding, connections to the environment. So working together is a great way to engage other people and bring extend your reach to new communities. Preserving resources. This was interesting that the Jewish Midrash and the Muslim teaching both had to do with waste. So preserving resources is an important tenet of both religions. And the weakest and poorest among us are often greatest affected by climate change. So environmental justice is social justice and is racial justice. So all of those are important intersectionalities to keep in mind. So if we think about a faith institution, we have our facility, we have our influence as a role model, and we have the collective action we can make by adding up all of the different people that are doing things. And rather than just being one person who saves some energy, we're looking at, 600 different households that are doing it. So let's go through some examples. And this is what I call the highlight reel. So one of the first things that you can do if you want to take action, and I'm trying to move this down, I can't quite see the top there, is to build a green team is often a good step. So a couple of examples. Locally, we have a great community. Peace of Christ Parish has I can't see what it's called there, Care for Creation Committee. There's Spiritus Christi has a Mother Earth group, the Zen Center. So those are both like groups that meet focused on environmental causes. And then there are individuals, like at the Rochester Zen Center, there are individuals that are involved with RICA, but take different actions and campaigns back to their congregation and have been very successful implementing things at the Zen Center. And then another example would be the Rochester Genesee Region American Baptist Church Creation Collaborative Gathering. So this is all of the American Baptist churches in Rochester are working together on actions around the environment. So you can see here, there's a plethora of resources available. We have some of them out on the RICA website under resources. So there's an organization called Green Faith that has a Green Faith guide. This is the generic Energy Star action workbook for congregations that we heard a little bit about a specific one for Muslim organizations. And then here we have, another example of a greening guide. So this is a really great first step and a way to gather people within your congregation that have similar interests. Probably the simplest thing, or the easiest first step, would be to think about the source of energy. And one of the simplest things you can do is something called community solar. So that's here on the right-hand side. RICA is partnering with one company that offers this. For those of you that are not in New York State, I think New York State is really a leader in terms of community solar in the country. And Rochester faith communities are really doing a wonderful job trying to participate in this. What this really essentially is a way for people that maybe are renters or don't have the investment to put solar on their rooftop to participate in a community scale solar project. So our partner Ampion has worked with over 40 local houses of worship. Congregation Beth Shalom is one, Temple Sinai is one, Temple Beth Kodesh, several different local congregations are participating in community solar. And within them, they have extended and have the households that are congregant members also sign up for community solar. It's essentially a win-win-win for everyone. All you have to do is sign up. There's no fee to sign up. There's no fee to cancel at any time. And every time the solar farm generates electricity on your behalf, you get credits on your utility bill, and you only pay 90 cents on the dollar for those credits. So you're saving for each credit that you receive, you're only paying 90 cents for the credit. For those of you that are interested in this program, again, you can do it for your facility or you could do it for your household. There's a webinar tomorrow night that you can find out more information about it at www.rica.net. That's our website. And search for the event Community Solar. It's at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, it's probably the simplest, easiest thing you can do to take action to support renewable energy and achievement of our renewable energy targets. On the left, obviously, there's also the opportunity to put rooftop solar on a house of worship. Several different faith organizations have goals to get a portion of their houses of worship to have solar panels on it. This picture here is in connection with the campaign from the World Evangelical Alliance, which has set a goal of 20% of its houses of worship to have rooftop solar by 2025. The organization Interfaith Power and Light conducts a census each year, and in 2019, 770 houses of worship had rooftop solar. It was about double from the year before, so it's still a tiny fraction, but it's growing with a total PV capacity of 45 megawatts. So this is also another great option, and RICA has been working a little bit. I think there are about 3 different houses of worship that are considering this. It's a little more challenging, certainly more complicated than signing up for community solar, but there are ways to do it, and RICA would love to work with any house of worship in the Rochester area that's thinking about it to get some best practices and lessons learned and help out with some of the legwork. Next is energy efficiency. So this is also, I think, as Saffet had pointed out, 40% of the emissions come from the built environment. It's a really big place that you can have an impact. So here we see most congregations can cut, really anybody that implements energy efficiency improvements, the typical improvement is about 30%. So that's money that can then be put into the sustainability of the house of worship or the congregation, into ministry work. Saving money is always a good thing. This picture here is from Akron, New York, of a church called St. Michael's. This is in between Rochester and Buffalo, that is putting in a geothermal system. So clean heating and cooling is a really big push, trying to shift from fossil fuel heating and cooling to electricity, where our grid can become more and more renewable is a great option. Other things like changing out light bulbs and adding insulation and removing old appliances are all ways that congregations can improve their energy efficiency. RICA also has a program where we're partnering, whoops, I'm trying to just get the title of this, with some RG&E and a program called Sustainable Homes Rochester, which is administered by a nonprofit called Pathstone. So both of those programs assist respectively houses of worship and commercial institutions and households to get free energy audits in most cases and access to incentives and rebates, especially low and middle income households. There are really wonderful opportunities to get things in many cases for free and also at significant discounts. And you'd be surprised what qualifies for some of these programs. So for example, the Empower New York program, I think due to the COVID pandemic, they increased the threshold. I think a single person household qualifies for the program if they make less than $53,000 a year, but you can find more information again on the RICA website or the website for these programs. Another thing that we have some congregations doing is thinking about their transportation. On the right here, obviously carpooling, no idle zones. Here's a picture from Temple Sinai back in 2010, 2011, where the congregation class gifted a bike rack and we had a day of bike to shul call to try and reduce some of our transportation emissions. But also if we think about electric vehicles and shifting to electric vehicles, this is a picture from the Zen Center Retreat Center in Batavia. They also have 4 charging stations there, which have 2 ports each. That's 8 different ports. And I believe they have 4 ports at their downtown Rochester, Park Avenue area location. So due to the Charge New York program, they're in many cases completely free to install. The rebate will cover the cost of the installation, at least it did in this case and in many of the cases. So again, this is a really great opportunity for congregations to shift to renewable energy and eliminate fossil emissions. So just a few more to go through. Obviously, education and worship is a big area of influence. RICA is moving its summit, which is an annual event that we had done in person, to a virtual event. And as part of that, we have been interviewing clergy from different faith organizations in the Rochester area. The past month of November, we had Reverend Lane Campbell, who's shown here, who was telling us about, I believe it's the Presbyterian Church in downtown Rochester. Before that, we had the Roshi from the Zen Center. Next month, we'll have Rabbi Stein from Temple Brit Kodesh. We have a group that is preparing a webinar on Laudato Si for the Spanish-speaking community that will be conducting a webinar in February for those that are interested in that. And another, so there are lots of examples of ways to integrate into worship or education. Another thing I just wanted to highlight would be RICA Youth, which is a group that recently formed last summer to connect with different youth groups and get youth involved in some of the work, interfaith climate action work that we do. So if you have kids or you're involved in a youth group, please try and connect up with RICA. We're planning a fashion exchange in the spring. Hopefully people will be out and about by then. There are a lot of things that congregations can do around food and food choices. Obviously, you know, this conscious eco-kashrut or conscious eating and thinking about what you eat is an important step. Food waste is another big area, talking about waste. Coming up in February on the 10th, we're having a webinar by a local group called Lettuce to talk about food waste prevention. this graphic at the bottom is a representation, I believe this appeared in the New York Times, of the amount of food waste that a family of 4 generates. I believe this is in 1 month. So it's about $1,600 worth of food gets wasted by the average family of 4 in a year. Another event has to do with rejuvenating agriculture and the way that we grow our food and how we treat our land. There's a screening event of the film Kiss the Ground on March 11th and a discussion panel after that. Gardens and composting of food waste are also great opportunities. Just to highlight one congregation in the Rochester area, St. Mark's and St. John's Episcopal Church. They were struggling on understanding how to keep their congregation going, and they decided to shift focus and think about how they could serve their community, and came up with a complete shift in their the way that they run their church, and implemented 7 urban gardens in the Beechwood area of Rochester. They have a farm stand that provides food to those in need. They have a compost on site and a program where people in the community can bring their food scraps to be composted. And they do educational programs and have a kids club growing program out of their church. So this is a great opportunity and a great example. And then for those that are looking at a simpler, easier solution, if you don't want to start your own composting, you can sign up for composting. This is a picture of Temple Sinai's drop-off bucket exchange. When people come each week to Sunday school on Sundays, they can just drop off a bucket full of food waste and take home a clean one. This is a partnership with Impact Earth. Currently, this is on hold due to COVID, but hopefully it'll get started up again. And I think there were 3 of them at different faith organizations, two other churches in the Rochester area when we had to stop it. So there's lots more that you can do. I mentioned that the youth will be doing a clothing swap and exchange, opportunities to rescue, whether it be food or resources and clothing, and reuse it or share resources are great ideas for houses of worship to do. Here's some action and advocacy that Rika has been involved with. Last year, we did a tree planting ceremony at 4 different houses of worship in the Rochester area. Obviously, planting trees is a symbolic as well as a practical step to try and increase the opportunity to sequester carbon. This year, we planted a tree outside of Abundant Life Faith Center, which is tying together social justice, and this is the site where Daniel Prude was shot in, not shot, but where Daniel Prude was killed in Rochester. Lastly, green procurement and divestment. We heard a little bit about the opportunity to divest. There's many of the different national level religious organizations are looking at divestment. You can do it also in your own investment level, or it can be simple actions in terms of where you buy your coffee from. You can buy it from a local nonprofit or a local B corporation that's a social enterprise that's trying to help women in transition while selling coffee. So those are other opportunities for action at a congregation level. So to sum it up, get started. My number one reason for that would be it feels good. You can feel paralyzed and depressed about the state of things and the hill that we have to climb. But if you're doing something and taking action, it really feels good. And you get to meet people and you feel a sense of community. As I said in the beginning, figure out what you care about and what you know about and what your sphere of influence is. And that's a great place to start, hopefully within your faith community. Preaching to the choir is okay. I think people get hung up a lot of the time to try and convince other people on what they can do, but there's a lot of work just providing solutions and taking actions with people that are like-minded like you. So that's, I think in my book, is okay. And when you're working with other groups, make sure that there's mutual benefit, that both parties involved are getting something out of the arrangement. And quite often you'll find that there are win-win-wins possible. So there are ways to save money and be good to the environment. There are ways to improve social justice and be good to the environment. Are ways to improve racial justice and be good to the environment. Start with a few small successes. If you're working on a team, replacing light bulbs, composting, community solar, those are great things to get under your belt and start with. And share and celebrate your action. I say celebrate your action, not celebrate your success, because all action actually is valuable and you learn from it. So don't necessarily get hung up on whether your first thing was a success, because you've influenced other people and you've learned from the experience. So with that, I think we're a little bit over time, but I hope it wasn't too quick to run through that. And I will just say thank you for those of you that are in the Rochester area, or really anyone. Please go and check out our website, www.rica.net. And if you have any questions, you can email us. And thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jackie. This was great. I just thought we got the religious, we've sort of got a little academic, we got practical. It was such a nice mingling of different voices. And I thought we could end with a voice, a little song, and then if, I don't know how this goes with the Zoom, if people have some questions, we could go. But I asked another daughter. I'm very grateful to my daughters, Leva and Yael and Nomi, and for my son Moshe for helping me out with this today. They're really quite a source, you know. So if we can turn to Yael now, and it's just a sort of a way of pulling ourselves together. Sometimes people take deep breaths, sometimes people sing a song, but I'd like to do that. So if we can switch to her, and I think the word we're going to be on, right?
Yes, I think they will be. I think we'll put them on. Thank you, everybody, so much. And I also just want to let you know I'm going directly from here to clean out my fridge. I mean, either cook or eat whatever's in there. So I'm inspired. Thank you. Adama v'shamayim chom ha'esh tzlil hamayim אני מרגיש זו בגופי, רוחי ונשמתי, אדמה ושמיים, חום האש, צליל המים, אני מרגיש זו בגופי, ברוחי בנשמתי, היה, 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 הו, היה, 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 הו, היה, 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 love the earth, love the sky, heat of fire, drop of water. I can feel it in my body, in my spirit, in my soul. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. I can feel it in my body, in my spirit, and in my soul. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do people have questions that they'd like to ask right now? I don't know, or we have to go. I mean, this did go over a little bit, but I thought it was really wonderful. I have to say, it was very, very lovely. So I'm going to leave it up to other people to make the. Shall we all say shalom, salem?
Yeah, it was great. Debbie, thank you for organizing this really. I mean, I think I understand it's not easy given the challenging and strange time we are in right now. I mean, I think, and thank you to all the speakers really. I mean, I think for the thoughtful and very effective presentation. And in 1 hour, I would say that we have learned much and about the perspective of our respective faith and our responsibility towards safeguarding the planet. So thank you so much. And again, thank you very much for organizing. And I hope that we keep making efforts to safeguard our environment and continue organizing events like this in the future to raise awareness.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you once again. Thank you, all the speakers. They were wonderful. So I wish you a nice afternoon.
you.
A nice gray day in Rochester. Enjoy it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.